Hey, Clemson family, it's time to talk about the big issues on the minds of Coach Dabo Swinney and three key Tigers players at ACC Media Days this week. Plus, we're going to preview how Davis Allen, Jake Brenningstool, and the rest of the Clemson tight ends might be able to give the Clemson offense a lift this year.
This is Daniel Shirley. We'll also break down Boston College and the always tough game with the Eagles and see how the Tigers finished up in the Major League Draft.
I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to episode 8 of the Reign Supreme Alway podcast. Go ahead and hit that subscribe or that follow button like a lot of other folks are doing so you won't miss out, and we'll keep you caught up on Clemson sports. You can find us at clemsonkickoff.com. You can find us on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff and on Facebook at Reign Supreme Alway. A lot of you are finding us on YouTube where we post our audio, and that is tremendous. Plus, you can find us on all the biggest podcast apps. Let's get into what head coach Dabo Swinney had to say at the ACC Kickoff media event. One of the things that stood out to me was how he talked about promoting coordinators.
That's been a big key for the success of this program during Dabo Swinney's tenure, and there's a track record there. There's a reason why he promoted Wes Goodwin and he promoted Brandon Streeter. Those coaches have earned the right to get that spot, and he has seen it work with Jeff Scott and Tony Elliott and the other coaches he has promoted through the system. So I know that fans get upset and want to question everything that a coach does. I think at this point, you almost have to trust Dabo Swinney and what he's doing with his coaching staff.
Absolutely. He's seemed to know when to go outside, when to promote from within. It's gone pretty well with 6 consecutive playoff appearances and a 10-win season to follow that. He also talked about continuity on the player roster. He talked about in the spring, he had 109 guys start, had 109 guys still on the roster now. Maybe that's a little bit of a cherry pick stat because a lot of the player movement starts before the spring gets going. Nonetheless, the overall point is valid. There's been a lot of stability on the player roster.
There has. Again, fans get upset. Why isn't Clemson using the transfer portal to bring players in? And that's a valid argument at times, but at least you're not losing waves of players from the roster that you already have. And I do like the focus being on this roster and not always being about going and getting someone from the outside. Not every program has to be exactly the same, and not every program needs to go get 10 transfers. If you can add an offensive lineman here or there or a running back and who can help the room, that's great. But how many players are transferring and then want to sit? You've got to find the right fit, the right guys. And, we haven't seen Clemson do that quite often yet. It will happen at some point. But I think if you're a Clemson fan, you've got to be really excited by the loyalty that you've seen from those 109 who Dabo mentioned. Some of those guys could have left. Bill, we've talked about the defensive ends, how much talent and depth at defensive end there is. None of those guys left. Some of them might have said, hey, I want to play. This isn't right. I'm going to play more. I want to go somewhere where I can play, and nobody did. So I think it's a very good sign for this team, the leadership of this team. And I think that's a great thing going into this season.
One of those guys that easily could have left might have been KJ Henry, who, as I mentioned earlier in another episode, really seemed to break out last year, really seemed to be a more complete player, able to close out on big plays behind the line of scrimmage. I think what stood out most to me, in addition to him crediting Coach Dabo Swinney for him wanting to remain a Tiger and come back this year and stay with the program, was how much he talked about how the team put into that bowl game last year, the Cheez-It Bowl. I mean, it could literally be considered a cheesy bowl game, right? It wasn't one of the New Year's Six. It wasn't a playoff game. They did get to come down to Orlando, do a lot of fun things, and you could see the effort on the field. Like, nobody was mailing it in. They might have been able to say, oh, no Breece Hall for Iowa State, or it's early in the offseason, let's get out of here, let's go home. No, they put their all into it. And so he talked about how really that was a major theme for a lot of the players, and especially to me, after having a 6-year run in the playoffs, they weren't going to let it be a letdown.
Well, there's an appreciation for winning, and I think you like to see that, right? And finishing the season on a high note. And I know some people talk about momentum from bowl games carrying over. I don't really buy that because there's 7 months before they play another game. But you can end the season on a high note and gives you confidence going into the spring or going into workouts and in the spring and the summer. And you at least have that positive feeling about yourself. Bill, you and I were there. That team played hard in that game. They were down, 30 scholarship players in that game because of injury. Iowa State's a good team. They had their quarterback. I know that Breece Hall didn't play, but they had most of their players, and Clemson played hard in that game. It wasn't a clean game all the way through, and it wasn't pretty offensively or any of that, but they played hard and played well for the most part and got a big win coming out of the 2021 season.
Another unit that played hard in that game, and I think it showed at least in the running results, was the offensive line. And another leader there, Jordan McFadden, down in the trenches, was able to speak and meet the media. I think what was interesting in that was hearing him talk about Coach Thomas Austin, who moves up to offensive line coach, replacing Robbie Caldwell, who has gone to the front office, so to speak. And McFadden talked about the contrasting styles there, but how Austin's resume of having been in the NFL here and there for a few years is not only working on the recruiting trail, as you and I have talked about, but it's working inside the locker room and on the practice field as well. Apparently he's not a big yeller, but he has ways of getting the message across and helping guys make the most of themselves.
I liked the hire. I did. I liked it when Thomas came back from Georgia State and joined the staff, not as the lead offensive line coach, but he was on the staff. So I thought that was a really good move. You don't bring him in from the outside and then just make him the offensive line coach. You get him in the system, you get him in the program and let him see what it's like and what you want to get done. And I thought that was a really good move. Now, is he always going to do everything the same way Robbie Caldwell did? No, he's not the same coach. Every coach has different ways of doing things. And it doesn't mean Robbie's were wrong and Austin's are right. It's just a different way. So we'll see how it goes moving forward.
It's funny how the offensive line often gets overlooked, but they are literally half the guys on the field if you consider the tight end sort of a half and half spot. Blocking is the name of the game on offense more than people realize. It's real easy to follow the ball and have a lot of attention paid to those skill position guys, but it really all starts up front.
It does. It doesn't matter what system you run. If you can't block, you're not going to have success. I don't care if you run it 60 times a game or throw it 60 times a game. If you can't block, it's not going to work. And you have to be able to block if you're going to have any success on offense.
Speaking of success on offense, the third player taken up to Charlotte was quarterback DJ Uiagalelei. And when you talk about someone who has not escaped criticism, that is the guy. A lot of fans really wanting more out of the quarterback position. Clemson honestly needing more out of the quarterback position this year. I don't think all of that comes from simply improved play at quarterback. I think there's going to be a lot of areas of the offense that need to improve. There's been some discussion of that today in Charlotte, yesterday also with the coaches before Clemson headed up to the ACC media days. Uiagalelei seemed to take it all in stride, really likes working with new passing game coordinator Kyle Richardson, who moves up to tight ends coach as quarterbacks coach Brandon Streeter became offensive coordinator. What do you see out of DJ coming this year? And we don't have to do a full quarterbacks preview. That'll be down the road a little bit. But what do you see about DJ? How is he going to take kind of a lackluster spring game and turn that into big performances this fall?
Well, we heard about him losing the weight from the bowl game and heading into spring. And then he didn't look great in the spring game. But I still think he was having problems with his knee. I still think he was having problems with the finger on his throwing hand. Remember, that's not on his left hand. That's on his right hand. I believe if he's healthy, he's going to play much better than he did last year. Is he the guy who played at Notre Dame and in Boston College his freshman year? Let's hope so. That would be awesome. Or is he the guy that he was last year? I don't think so. I think it's somewhere in the middle, but I think it's a lot closer to what we saw his freshman year than what we saw last year.
Good leadership shown by all three guys, as well as Coach Dabo Swinney in Charlotte. And day 2 of ACC Media Days continues tomorrow. I believe they did Atlantic the first day. They'll do Coastal the second day. So there'll be some interesting news out there. Keep your eyes peeled to Twitter or your favorite news sites for the latest of what's going on. The next team preview that we have this offseason is Boston College. And head coach Jeff Hafley took a bit of a step back last year from his first season with the Eagles when he showed a lot of promise. Ended up 6-6 last year. They'd started off 4-0, but then lost one of their top players. His absence was key against the Tigers when Clemson got the win over Boston College when the Eagles did not have standout quarterback Phil Jerkovich under center.
That was key in that game, and that was a close game. Who knows how it would have played out if Jurkovec played in that game. He's such a good player. He's a really talented quarterback. Exciting to see him back. I know that makes it a tougher game for Clemson, but you want to play teams when they're at their best. And he's one of the better quarterbacks that you're going to see in the ACC. So we'll see if he can bounce back from that injury. And if he can, that makes Boston College a lot more dangerous going into this season.
He will face a challenge more than likely against Clemson. 0 returning starting offensive linemen on the Boston College roster, and that doesn't match up well with Clemson's front line, let alone the linebackers behind them. Also, 4 wide receivers transferred out, according to SI.com.
That wide receiver group returned 66% of its receiving yards, and that starts with Zay Flowers. He is a dynamic player. There were a lot of talk about maybe he would transfer and leave Boston College. He said at the ACC media days that there were some offers for him to make a lot of money somewhere else if he transferred, and he turned it down. So if you're a Boston College fan, you've got to be really excited about that. And he is a dangerous, dangerous talent for this Clemson defense to have to face.
If Boston College can put points on the board, Clemson will perhaps struggle to keep pace. The number 3 pass defense in the nation last year, Boston College had. And with all 3 starting linebackers back, the run defense also could improve, which would match a little more with what we've seen historically from Boston College, wouldn't it?
It would. They're a physical team most years, and they are a tough team. Almost 70% of their tackles are back, more than 70% of their tackles for loss, almost 90% of their sacks are back. So this should be more like the Boston College defense that we've seen in the past, where it is a physical bunch. They make things hard on your quarterback, and they really get after your running backs in the running game. So I think that's what we'll expect to see from Boston College.
Boston College game might be one of those where we need to see some evolution or revolution in the Clemson offense, some changes in the playbook under Streeter. It'll be week 6 of the season. They'll be coming off the NC State game and the Wake Forest game before that one. So they'll be in the thick of the Atlantic Division schedule at that point. You sure don't want to lay an egg there after 2 big games and then something of a rivalry game with Florida State coming up. Back-to-back road trip weeks, Boston College and Florida State.
It's a tough trip. It always is a tough trip to Boston. It's funny, that's where Dabo Swinney got his first win. You always hear about that every time Clemson plays this game, that's where his first victory as Clemson's interim head coach at that point took place. But it's always a good trip. I know Clemson fans enjoy going to Boston, seeing a little bit of the sights, Fenway Park and those things. But you have to be focused in this game because Boston College is going to make you work for it.
This is one of those where I think a lot of the national pundits just expect a victory. Never seems to come that easily, but when best is the standard, if that's what you're saying, then you'd better leave no doubt.
For sure, and be ready to play. I mean, you have to be ready to play against this Boston College team, especially with Phil Jurkovec there, Zay Flowers. That's as good of a combination of quarterback and wide receiver in the conference. So the Tigers will have to be ready to play in that game.
You talk about passing game connections, and Clemson needs to establish some connections with the tight ends this year, getting the ball in their hands, getting them to work over the middle of the field. That's been a pretty big point of discussion for a lot of people who follow the Clemson football program closely. I wouldn't say that they abandoned the middle of the field last year. I'd say it was more like 2 years ago. The substandard offensive line play kind of took away some of that middle of the field action. You saw Trevor Lawrence having some passes tipped. You saw DJ Uiagalelei having some passes tipped and also just making some bad decisions at times. So you're looking for someone like Davis Allen to really step up. And I think last year it was easy to see when he took over at the position, he was an upgrade over Braden Galloway. The rest of the team couldn't necessarily take full advantage of that upgrade at tight end, but Allen was prepared. He was the classic, number 2 guy ready to be the starter when the opportunity presented itself.
He played hurt last year. Think about that. Davis Allen was hurt most of last year and missed the spring game. Just shows you exactly what he accomplished and what he could accomplish if he's healthy. It was an impressive performance by him, even when he was banged up, and it'll be good to see him healthy as we go into this season.
Another name to watch there is Jake Brenningstool. I think typically Clemson plays 2 tight ends, not necessarily on the field at the same time, but they rotate really well. They keep guys fresh. Brenningstool is the kind of guy who might be able to make that impact the way Jordan Leggett did catching the ball. Hard to say if that'll happen this year, since I think Davis Allen is the clear starter.
He is, but I do think Jake brings something to the team. I think Sage Ennis brings something to the team. You mentioned Jordan Leggett. It feels like we haven't seen the tight end used the same way since Jordan left. And it's hard to match what Jordan brought to this team. So you want to see that become more and more part of the offense again. Why has that happened? A lot of reasons. We haven't seen this position used as much as we had in the past.
You mentioned Sage Ennis, also plenty capable. And kind of, you hate the player comp thing, but just in general, it sort of reminds me a little bit of Stanton Seckinger, who flashed a little bit early and then better talent came along. He ended up moving into more of a reserve role, but very capable. You're looking at least 3 guys there who can contribute. And then there's some depth behind there, a legacy name in Josh Sapp and a few other guys who will be available if needed. But with Allen and Brenningstool, you got a pretty good 1-2 punch there. That if everyone else is doing their jobs around them, if the quarterback's making the right reads, if the O-line is creating passing lanes and creating time for pass plays to develop, we could see much more of the tight end production in the passing game this year.
I like this group, Bill. I do. I know you don't look at Clemson as tight end U and those kinds of things, and you're not going to put this group up there with the top tight end groups in the country, but I like what this group brings to the team. There's athleticism, there's speed, there's good hands. We've just got to see it all come together. I think it will. I believe they're going to have more of an impact this year than they have had in recent years. That starts with Davis Allen for sure. He is a talented guy. And, we've talked about how can this offense get back on track and be more like what we've seen from Clemson's offense. Well, one key way is getting the ball in Davis Allen's hands, and I think we'll see that this season.
I'm a little skeptical. I'm a little show me, don't tell me, but the talent is clear. There are just so many other variables that all have to improve that it'll be a big addition if it can happen. One last thing to mention, I think, and that will be the Major League Baseball draft. We already talked about some of the guys who went on days 1 and 2. There are a few other picks down the line, but all in all, Clemson doesn't seem to have been dinged too hard by the draft this year.
It doesn't feel that way. Obviously, you lose the ACC Player of the Year and Max Wagner. That hurts. Mac Anglin was one of your key starters in the season, although Mac probably didn't have the season that he would like. And then Jeffrey Gilbert was a really good player for this team when he got called upon. So those hurt, but it's not a mass exit that you see some seasons. So that's a positive for this group. Keeping Tristan Smith, the signee from South Carolina, in the fold could be a big boost for this group in 2023. But then the big loss could be Brock Porter. He's the signee and was drafted by the Rangers. Matt Conley from ClemsonSports.com says it sounds like he's going to sign, so he won't be with the Tigers. We'll see if that is what happens. If he does stay, it's a great thing for the team. But if he doesn't, that could be a hole that someone's going to have to fill.
To me, the departure of Wagner was kind of expected, and I'm not sure I really expected Porter to end up at Clemson anyway. They were both very highly regarded, and I think that's why I kind of say not getting very hard. Those are two talents that any team would love to have, but also really belong in the professional ranks, and all you can do is tip your cap and be happy for them and hope they do well. When you get a guy like Tristan Smith back, maybe that was a little more unexpected or a little more on the bubble, and to see that he ends up coming to Clemson as reported by WSPA, that's going to be something that keeps the Tigers afloat. They also lost some transfers out, but they're getting some transfers in. They're getting some commits who are coming here that they wouldn't have gotten without Coach Eric Bakich taking the position. Heck of a job by this coaching staff to keep things tied together, and fortunate that the draft didn't hit harder than it did.
They really are fortunate with how things have turned out in the early few days of the program. I'm really excited about the direction of the program. The coaching staff is in place. The coaching staff is a really good group. It feels like an upgrade over what was there before. And they're starting to get that talent in and keep the talent mostly that was there. So I'm excited about 2023 for this baseball program and see if it can get going back in the right direction.
We will keep you posted. If anything develops in the next few days, we will react to it and talk about how it all fits in. Our next episode, we're also going to get into the offensive line on the football team. We mentioned Jordan McFadden earlier. He'll be the anchor at left tackle. We'll also preview that Florida State game. And if any news breaks in the next few days in football, basketball, or any other sports, we'll keep you up to speed on that as well. Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed this, and we're glad you found us, Clemson family. Go ahead and smash that subscribe button or hit that follow button. We're a free podcast. You're not going to miss out anytime we post. If you subscribe to us or follow us, we'll react to the big news that's happening around Clemson sports. Our homepage has some great resources. Check it out at clemsonkickoff.com. You'll find all our important links there. You can also follow us on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff. We'll retweet. We'll give quick hit opinions in real time as needed. And we're on Facebook at Reign Supreme Alway. Until next time, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.